no election, no military, or no foreign power can take me out of office unless Allah says so.
On the African continent, power isn't just a job, it's an obsession. From rewriting constitutions to silencing critics, some presidents just don't know when to stop. They came as heroes, promised change, and ended up refusing to leave the throne. Some were kicked out by force, others are still in power right now, ruling like it's their birthright. So buckle up, because today, we're counting down 15 African presidents who refused to leave power, from the generals who wouldn't quit to the Democrats who turned their nations into dynasties. At number 15, Joseph Kabila, Democratic Republic of Congo. He was just 29 when he inherited the presidency after the assassination of his father, Laurent Kabila, in 2001. Many saw him as a symbol of hope, young, calm, and educated. But that hope slowly turned into frustration. When his second term ended in 2016, Kabila simply didn't leave. He delayed elections, citing logistical issues, while opposition leaders were jailed and protests turned deadly. For 2 long years, the DRC was stuck in political limbo, a country without direction, ruled by a man clinging to power. It wasn't until 2019 that Kabila finally stepped aside under international pressure, but not before securing his loyalists deep within the system. Even today, many Congolese believe Kabila still pulls strings from behind the curtain. At number 14, Yahya Jammeh, the Gambia. He first appeared as a humble soldier in 1994, promising to save Gambia from corruption. "I will rule for only 5 years," he declared. 22 years later, he was still there. Jammeh built a regime of fear, blending mysticism, military might, and manipulation. He claimed to cure AIDS with herbs and ruled with an iron fist. In 2016, when he shockingly lost the election to Adama Barrow, Jammeh first conceded, then changed his mind, calling for fresh elections. The world watched as West African troops surrounded his palace. After weeks of defiance, Jammeh finally fled into exile, but not before looting millions and leaving behind a nation traumatized by decades of dictatorship. At number 13, Ahmed Sékou Touré, Guinea. When Guinea became the first French colony in Africa to gain independence in 1958, Sékou Touré was hailed as a hero. But over the years, that hero turned into a tyrant. Touré built a one-party state where dissent meant death. Thousands were imprisoned or executed in what became known as Camp Boiro, a place of terror. He ruled Guinea for 26 years until his death in 1984, never once allowing true democracy to take root. Touré refused to share or relinquish power, insisting that only he could guide the nation. His leadership left behind a complex legacy of independence, yes, but also of fear and repression that scarred a generation. At number 12, Blaise Compaoré, Burkina Faso. He came to power in 1987 after a coup that killed his friend, the revolutionary icon, Thomas Sankara. For 27 years, Blaise Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso with a calm smile and an iron grip. When his term limit approached in 2014, he tried to change the constitution to stay longer, but the people had enough. Massive protests filled the streets of Ouagadougou. The parliament building was set ablaze. Within days, the unthinkable happened. Compaoré fled the country, ending nearly 3 decades of rule. He later resurfaced in Ivory Coast, where he still lives in exile. A man once feared, now remembered as the president who fell to the power of his own people. At number 11, Denis Sassou Nguesso, Republic of the Congo. He first took power in 1979, lost it in 1992, then fought his way back in 1997 and has never left since. Denis Sassou Nguesso's story is one of political resurrection. He rewrote the constitution, crushed opposition, and has won every election since. Some say with results too good to be true. Under his rule, Congo has seen oil wealth concentrated in elite hands, while ordinary citizens struggle. Yet through force, strategy, and sheer endurance, Sassou Nguesso remains one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, over 38 years in total. He's proof that in some African nations, losing power isn't the end, it's just an intermission. At number 10, Yoweri Museveni, Uganda. When he took power in 1986, Museveni was celebrated as the man who would restore Uganda after years of chaos. Decades later, he's still in office, and critics say he's become exactly what he once fought against. He removed presidential term limits, then age limits, ensuring he could rule indefinitely. His government silences dissent, while his son, a general, is seen as his likely successor. Museveni's iron rule has lasted nearly 4 decades, and Uganda's young generation has never known another leader. He once said, "I'm not here for power, I'm here for service." But after 39 years, even his supporters are starting to ask, where does service end and dictatorship begin? At number 9, Omar al-Bashir, Sudan. He came to power in 1989 through a military coup promising to restore Islamic values and stability. Instead, Sudan became synonymous with civil war, sanctions, and international isolation. For 30 years, Bashir ruled with brutality and survival instinct. He faced international arrest warrants for war crimes and genocide in Darfur, yet refused to step down. Even as protests filled the streets in 2019, Bashir laughed off calls to resign. But the tide turned. The army he once commanded turned against him. He was finally overthrown and imprisoned, ending 3 decades of one of Africa's most controversial regimes. Omar al-Bashir may be gone, but Sudan still bleeds from the wounds he left behind. At number 8, Idriss Déby, Chad. He came to power in 1990 after overthrowing Hissène Habré, promising democracy and reform. But instead of building institutions, Idriss Déby built a dynasty. For over 30 years, he ruled Chad with military precision, blending charisma with fear. He survived rebellions, assassination attempts, and coups. In 2005, he removed term limits, ensuring he could rule indefinitely. Even death didn't end his influence. In 2021, Déby was killed on the front lines fighting rebels, but the army immediately installed his son, Mohamed Déby, as interim president, effectively continuing his reign beyond the grave. In Chad, the Déby name remains synonymous with power itself. At number 7, Isaias Afwerki, Eritrea. He's the only president Eritrea has ever known. Since independence in 1993, Isaias Afwerki has ruled without a constitution, parliament, or free press. At first, he was hailed as a liberation hero, the man who freed Eritrea from Ethiopia's grip. But over time, Afwerki turned the nation into what human rights groups call Africa's North Korea. There are no elections, no term limits, and mandatory military service that can last for life. He once said, "We'll have democracy when there's no danger." 3 decades later, Eritreans are still waiting. And at nearly 80, Isaias Afwerki shows no sign of letting go. At number 6, Mobutu Sese Seko, Zaire, formerly DR Congo. For 32 years, Mobutu ruled what was then called Zaire, with leopard skin hats, grand palaces, and a cult of personality unmatched in Africa. He seized power in 1965 and declared himself the father of the nation. But behind the glamour was decay, corruption, poverty, and fear. Mobutu looted billions while his country crumbled. When asked about democracy, he famously replied, "You cannot have democracy with an empty stomach." By the 1990s, rebellion and illness weakened him, but he still refused to step down. It took a full-scale war, led by Laurent Kabila, to drive him out in 1997. He died in exile in Morocco, a fallen king who once believed Zaire was his private kingdom. At number 5, Gnassingbé Eyadéma, Togo. He seized power in 1967 and held it until his death in 2005, 38 years of unbroken rule. Eyadéma cultivated a myth around himself, claiming to be immortal, surviving plane crashes, and being protected by supernatural forces. He ruled Togo like a personal estate, crushing opposition and rewriting constitutions to stay in power. Even in death, his grip continued. The army illegally installed his son, Faure Gnassingbé, as president, turning Togo into one of Africa's few political dynasties. From father to son, the Eyadéma legacy lives on, proof that in Togo, power doesn't transfer, it's inherited. At number 4, Robert Mugabe, Zimbabwe. Once hailed as a liberation hero, Robert Mugabe became the face of defiance, and later, the symbol of overstaying one's welcome. He led Zimbabwe from independence in 1980 until his ousting in 2017, a staggering 37 years in power. Mugabe began as a visionary, championing education and land reform. But soon, power consumed him. Elections were rigged, opposition was crushed, and the economy collapsed under hyperinflation. Even in his 90s, Mugabe vowed never to retire. "Only God will remove me," he said. But in 2017, it wasn't God. It was his own army. The same system he built turned against him, ending one of Africa's longest reigns. At number 3, Muammar Gaddafi, Libya. When he overthrew Libya's monarchy in 1969, he was just 27 years old, young, ambitious, and full of revolutionary fire. For over 42 years, Gaddafi ruled Libya with a mix of charm, paranoia, and brutality. He called himself the brother leader, wore flowing robes, and lived in lavish desert tents. His green book was law, his image unavoidable. Those who challenged him vanished. Those who obeyed prospered. By 2011, after decades of dictatorship, Libyans rose up. Gaddafi refused to step down, declaring, "I will die here as a martyr." He did. His brutal death marked the end of an era, and a stark reminder of what happens when leaders refuse to leave power. At number 2, Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, Equatorial Guinea. No one in Africa has ruled longer. Not a king, not a president, no one. Teodoro Obiang came to power in 1979 after overthrowing his own uncle in a bloody coup. Since then, he's turned Equatorial Guinea, a small oil-rich nation, into one of the most tightly controlled states on Earth. While his family lives in luxury, much of the population remains in poverty. His son Teodorin is already being groomed to take over, complete with mansions, sports cars, and global controversies. After 46 years in power, Obiang still wins elections with suspiciously perfect margins. He doesn't just refuse to leave power, he's building a throne that might never be empty. Finally, at number 1, Paul Biya, Cameroon. Since 1982, Paul Biya has ruled Cameroon like a ghost in the palace, rarely seen in public, yet always in control. Nicknamed the Sphinx for his silence and mystery, Biya has outlasted presidents, generals, and even entire regimes across Africa. He's 92 years old and still in office, often governing from luxury hotels in Geneva. Through constitutional changes and carefully managed elections, Biya has secured over 4 decades of uninterrupted rule. He once said, "I am not obsessed with power." But after 43 years at the top, it's clear. Cameroon's democracy revolves around one man, Paul Biya.